Oh, hi everyone, welcome back. So, if you tuned in the other day of this video, I did part one of comparing sports teams to other sports teams, and I honestly did not anticipate for this to be this long, so I cut it up into two parts. So, sit back and enjoy the rest of my thoughts, as this is part two of comparing sports teams to other sports teams, and here is what I came up with. Phoenix Suns and the Minnesota Vikings. I was torn between the Jazz and Suns for the Vikings comparison here, but I chose the Suns because, like the Vikings, the Suns have had a better winning percentage and have been around a little longer. Also, both have lost at least 3 championships while winning none, whereas Utah only have 2 appearances and lost to legendary Bulls teams both times. So, getting on to this, when you look at the history between the Suns and the Vikings, you say to yourself, these two are the tallest midgets, because the Vikings were one of the most consistent teams in the 70s, and they even made it to 4 Super Bowls. But it wouldn't be a comparison if they won one of them, so they lost all 4 of them, not in a row, but they lost 4 of them pretty handily. After that, the Vikings became known as a playoff jobber, essentially, with constantly failing in the playoffs. The worst ones, in my opinion, being 1998 and 2009 in the conference championships. And they also got blown out in 2000 and 2017's NFC title games. And today, the Vikings have a good enough roster to make the playoffs, but they're not really dominant, even with a superstar in Justin Jefferson. They have endured a ton of heartbreak, and you just can't help but feel bad for them. For the Suns, they were founded in the late 60s, and they have had some rich regular season success in different decades like the 70s, 90s, and 2000s, but they could never just seal the deal. They lost the 1976, 1993, and 2021 NBA Finals, but you could usually pencil them in for the playoffs. Even then, they've only made it to 10 conference finals, so they have a reputation for playoff failure like the Vikings do. Devin Booker is a really good player, and he is still in his peak, and Suns fans are really high on him, but they were simply good at the wrong time with Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire, and Charles Barkley in the 90s as well. Which leads me to the fan bases. Both fan bases, while they are understandably depressed and cynical, they have a weird tendency to obsess over individual players. Vikings fans with Randy Moss, Chris Carter, and Jefferson. Suns fans with Devin Booker, as I said, thinking that he's the end-all, be-all to their problems. I mean, sure, he's a good player, but he's not going to carry them to the finals alone. They had this with Bradley Beal and KD too, but can you blame the fan bases? It's really all they have. Simply put, these two franchises never have anything go their way, and they can just never catch a break despite them being successful in the regular season. Buffalo Bills and the San Diego Padres, another 4L team on here, the Bills, and I compare them to the San Diego Padres nowadays. After decades of being perennial losers, both franchises' fortunes turned once the 2020s came, and are now two of the best teams in their leagues, but are seen as more of underdogs than favorites. The Padres are always good enough for the playoffs, but they're overshadowed by the Dodgers, Braves, and at times the Brewers and even the Giants in the NL. The Bills are the class of the AFC East. But if you're a Yu-Gi-Oh fan watching this, then you know what I mean when I say that they're Seto Kaiba while the Chiefs are the Pharaoh. Both teams have stacked rosters with star power that can put them over the top, and people feel like it's only a matter of time before they bring a title to their cities that have not won a title in 55 plus years, respectively. San Diego is all the Padres have, seeing that they lost the Clippers and Chargers, and Petco is always one of the most electric atmospheres in the MLB, while Buffalo loves their Bills to death in a city that also lost the Clippers, and the Sabres just provide them no joy whatsoever. Both have lost multiple championships in their league, Padres losing 2 World Series, and of course the Bills losing 4 straight Super Bowls in the early 90s, but then again, making 4 straight Super Bowls is pretty impressive. Like I said, they both were consistent losers for much of their existence, but they now have really good teams and play in cities that are starving for a championship and have unconditional and passionate love for their teams. Should they win a World Series or Super Bowl, imagine how Buffalo and San Diego would celebrate. Cincinnati Bengals and the Milwaukee Brewers. Yeah, you can tell I kind of tried to include every team from both the AFC North and NL Central here, being that my teams play in those divisions. So again, I must stress that these are not perfect comparisons. However, the Bengals and Brewers do have some things in common. Notably, they both have been bridesmaids for the bulk of their existence. So much so that it makes people forget they have appeared in the championship of their respective sports. They didn't win it, but they came really close to winning it. For the Bengals, they made it to 2 Super Bowls in the 80s and lost it both times to the 49ers dynasty, and they made it again in 2022 where they blew a lead against the Rams and lost. The Brewers made it to their only World Series around the same time the Bengals made it to their first Super Bowl and blew a 3-2 lead to the Cardinals in the World Series. Way to go, Milwaukee. Today, both franchises feel pretty good teams that have been on top of their divisions in recent past, and they have expectations of a championship run. Both also have young and exciting stars: Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson for the Bengals, Christian Yelich, Jackson Chourio, William Contreras, and Rhys Hoskins for the Brewers. Burrow is an MVP candidate the same way Yelich is one, and the Bengals defense is garbage the same way the Brewers defense is, so it feels like Burrow and Yelich are carrying both teams to glory. When it comes to the fans, both fan bases seem to be underestimated on how much of an electric atmosphere they give when they attend games too. So these two have very good teams that are hungry for a championship when they have not won one, and they have both been around since the late 1960s. Vegas Golden Knights and the Arizona Diamondbacks. These two are the youngest franchises and expansion teams to win a championship in their respective sports. I could just end it right there, but I'll go a little further. For the Knights, they benefited from the expansion draft in their first year of existence and have made the playoffs every year, including making it to the Stanley Cup in their first year of existence. They won it 5 years later, and fans kind of get annoyed with seeing them succeed and not being a bad team yet. For the Diamondbacks, they also benefited from the expansion draft and made the playoffs for the first time early in their existence and won the World Series in 2001, when they were just 3 years old as a franchise. Arizona has never truly been terrible for a consistent period of time, but they've never been world beaters at the same time either. They haven't made the playoffs as consistently as the Knights have, but you felt like whenever they made the playoffs, they could do some damage. The Diamondbacks also made the World Series in 2023, where they were defeated in 5 games by the Texas Rangers, so each have won and lost a championship in their rather short time of being a franchise. All in all, I need to give the Knights a little more time before I can say the Diamondbacks are a perfect representation of them, but I think for now the fact that these two have done better than most expansion teams have done warrants this comparison. Dallas Mavericks and the New York Giants. Okay, I need to explain this one for a bit, and you may or may not agree here. So both these franchises get hyped as blue blood franchises because they play in big market cities in Dallas and New York, and you'd think that they have been consistently winning franchises. However, the fact is, despite the fact they've won championships, they really have not been as good as you think. The Mavericks have been around since 1980, and they were mediocre to begin their franchise, but then the 90s came, and the Mavericks were the worst team in the NBA the entire decade before landing Dirk Nowitzki, who saved the franchise. And when Dirk entered his prime, the Mavs became a powerhouse in the NBA, winning 50 or more games and making the playoffs every year from 2000 to 2011, and made 2 NBA Finals during that time and won it in 2011. Since then, the Mavs have been a very streaky franchise who have been in and out of the playoffs. They made it again in 2024, where they were beaten soundly by the Boston Celtics. So in 45 years as a franchise, the Mavericks have a winning percentage of just .504, and they somehow get more media coverage and primetime games than they probably deserve. The Giants have now been a franchise for 100 years, and in that time, they have a winning percentage of just .520, which again is worse than you'd expect because they also get more media coverage and primetime games than they deserve. It is just the 13th all-time in winning percentage, and even during the time they won 4 Super Bowls from 1986 to 2012, their percentage was just 16th during that time. Like the Mavericks, the Giants have also had stints where they were in and out of the playoffs and won championships while garnering LT. LT is considered the greatest defensive player of all time, kind of like how Dirk is considered the greatest European player in NBA history. Now the Giants are one of the biggest laughingstocks in the NFL, no pun intended, like how the Mavericks were in the 90s. So the franchises as a whole have had some success, but they get undeserved praise from the media when they really haven't been consistent with winning. But the thing that stands out to me are the fan bases. Both fan bases are just feeling empty and depressed right now. Daniel Jones is no longer the Giants' starting QB, despite him getting a bag thrown at him a few years ago, undeservedly so, and he was either hurt or flat out bad when he was on the field. Kind of like how Anthony Davis barely lasted 2 quarters worth of an NBA game when he donned the Mavs uniform for the first time. Kyrie Irving also tore his ACL just to kick him in the balls more, kind of like how Odell Beckham tore his when he was a Giant and he was never the same player again. Fans of both teams just look at their rosters and they just think, what did we do to deserve this? At least the Mavericks made the play-in, whereas the Giants are a top 5 pick in the draft yet again. But without Luka's triple-doubles that he produces in his sleep, Anthony Davis's health, and Kyrie on the court, I wouldn't expect the Mavericks to make a deep playoff run anytime soon. And speaking of Luka, can you believe the Mavs just traded him away in his prime to the Lakers for players who hadn't even made a big impact, and he's his usual self in LA? Not as much as you can believe the Giants traded superstar running back Saquon Barkley to their hated rivals, and all he did was turn in arguably the greatest season by a running back in NFL history, en route to the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. Only time will tell if the Lakers will win the finals, but I think you get the point with these two franchises and fan bases. They are depressed. Las Vegas A's and the Las Vegas Raiders. Once again, I tried to find a better comparison here, but the similarities are undeniable. Not just because they both have Oakland roots and will be two of Vegas's teams, but because they each have numerous relocations throughout their franchise's history too. The A's started in Philadelphia, then moved to Kansas City, followed by moving to Oakland, and are set to play their first season in Las Vegas after a 3-year lease in Sacramento. The Raiders started in Oakland, then moved to Los Angeles, then back to Oakland, and are now in Las Vegas. Both fan bases were incredibly passionate, loyal, and loved their teams when they were in Oakland, and then both leagues ripped the hearts out of their fans when they moved, and now fans could care less about both of them. Both are now two of the worst-ran franchises in their leagues with front offices and owners that are widely despised, and I honestly don't see them getting better anytime soon. However, when you look at these histories of the two, they have rich history and have had their glory days too. The A's won 3 straight World Series from 1972 to 74, and they took home another in 1989 when they had some loaded teams in the late 80s and early to mid-90s. They were also a solid team throughout much of the 2000s and had some runs in the 2010s, but those days seem like an eternity ago. Then you got the Raiders, who were juggernauts throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, winning 3 Super Bowls and missing the playoffs just 4 times from 1967 to 85 to start the Super Bowl era. The Raiders became good again in the mid to late 90s and carried that over to the early new millennium, where they made the Super Bowl but lost, and since then they have been absolute trash. Making the playoffs just twice since 2003, no playoff wins since 2002, no division titles since 2002, and finishing last in the AFC West 8 times since 2003. I guess I can also say both franchises won championships in different cities too, but does anyone associate the A's with Philadelphia? No more than you do with the Raiders in LA or even Las Vegas for that matter. These two have had some fine and golden days in the past and had some of the most die-hard fans, but those days are long gone and have devolved into laughingstocks with non-existent fans. Columbus Blue Jackets and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Unlike the previous century, these franchises' fan bases have never cared about these two. I say fan bases in air quotes. Like, really, would anyone care if these two relocated? I don't even think Jacksonville or Columbus would care. The Jaguars have been around since 1995, and they got off to a solid start as a franchise with being in the playoffs and even the AFC Championship a few times. They never won the title game, but not a bad start nonetheless. Then the 2010s came, and outside of a few fluke playoff runs, the Jaguars have mostly been terrible. Hell, they're more appreciated in London than Jacksonville. Case in point, in 2013, Jacksonville issued an apology for airing the Jaguars game over the Manning Bowl. The point? Jaguars fans didn't even want to watch their own team. Duval County is just not a big football market, and more often than not, Jags home games are just free home games for the opponent, and the fans of said teams usually take over the stadium. Then you got the Blue Jackets. They're as old as the new millennium, and, well, they haven't had much success either. They didn't win a playoff series until 2019 when they stunned the 62-win Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round of the playoffs in a sweep. All 10 Jacket fans were ecstatic to see them advance in the playoffs and pull off that historic win. You see my point? Myself personally, I've been to Columbus numerous times, and I can tell you that it's not even close to a hockey market. Columbus is Buckeye Town straight up. I mean, seriously, the Blue Jackets could win the Stanley Cup the same day that the Buckeyes work out a highly anticipated freshman for the team, and the latter would lead the Columbus news. Good luck trying to find a die-hard Jackets fan in Columbus. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But hey, at least Columbus has the Buckeyes. Jacksonville has nothing. Maybe Duval County has Seminole fans, but I don't speak for everyone here. In short, these are two franchises that have no business being where they are, and I don't think anyone would shed a tear if they moved to a more deserving market, because Jacksonville and Columbus are just very weak hockey and football markets respectively. Los Angeles Angels and the Anaheim Ducks. Hey, look, it's the can you believe these two won a championship realm again. Again, not just the fact that these two play in Anaheim, and most people forget they won a championship in their respective sports, but it goes deeper than that. Throughout much of the 2000s, these two were solid teams that were usually a shoo-in for the playoffs. The Ducks made the playoffs 5 times to start the 2000s and made it to a pair of Stanley Cups, winning it in 2007. They carried it over to the 2010s where they made the playoffs every year from 2011 to 18. They only made 2 conference finals, but the fact they were in the playoffs that consistently shows how far they've fallen nowadays. Since the 2018-19 season, the Ducks have missed the playoffs every season, failed to have a season above 80 points, and have finished no higher than 6th place in the Pacific Division. As for the Angels, the 2000s were the golden days for them as they won the World Series in 2002 in a thrilling series over the Giants. They followed up with narrowly missing the playoffs in 2003, but from 2004 to 09, the Angels won the AL West 5 times and missed the playoffs just once. They made it to the ALCS twice during that time, and even though they lost it both times, again, it shows that the Angels have taken a major nosedive from what they used to be. Since 2010, the Angels have only made the playoffs once and got swept in the first round, and have only had 4 winning seasons, including not having a winning season since 2015. Oh, and they have been this inept despite having Mike Trout, Albert Pujols, and Shohei Ohtani, aka 3 generational talents. The Ducks haven't had any players on that level per se, but still had some decent talent in Chris Pronger, Ryan Getzlaf, Paul Correa, and Corey Perry. From Figgins, Vlad Sr., Garrett Anderson, Troy Gloss, Darren Erstad, Tim Salmon, Jared Weaver, Jared Washburn, John Lackey, and Francisco Rodriguez. It seems like it's been forever since the Angels fielded a formidable team on the diamond, like how the Ducks had put a competitive team on the ice. Both owners are hated by the fans of each team. Both fan bases long for another championship, but at least they can say they've seen their team win one, and they secretly envy the Dodgers and Kings but pretend like they don't. The New York Knicks and the Washington Commanders. This one is kind of obvious too. They're two of the oldest franchises in their sports, had glory days that were decades ago, and have or at least had two of the most hated owners in sports, and that made them very incompetently ran franchises for the better part of the last 25 years. Everyone hates Dolan like how everyone hates Dan Snyder, but nowadays both have young, up-and-coming, and exciting teams that are in the playoffs and they're hungry for a championship. The last time the Knicks won a championship was 1973, but their team led by Jalen Brunson gives New Yorkers a sense that they could go on a deep run. I can't really sympathize with New Yorkers since they have the Yankees and Giants, and most fans of those teams listening to this have seen a combined, I would say, 15 championships at most, but the Knicks are an exception because even though they won 2 NBA Finals, it's been 52 years since their last one, and there are plenty of New Yorkers who have never seen the Knicks win a championship. Last time the Commanders won a Super Bowl was 1991 when they were the Redskins, and with this past season, Rookie of the Year sensation QB Jaden Daniels and their offense led to them their first NFC championship since that 91 season, and there's newfound hope in the nation's capital with new ownership on top of that. I think it's safe to assume most Washington fans listening to this are old enough to have seen all 3 Super Bowls, but just for them putting up with Snyder all this time, they deserve to see a 4th one. Both franchises have very dedicated fan bases. We're happy to see these proud franchises be competitive again, and it feels like it's only a matter of time before they see a parade in their cities. Chicago Bears and the Cincinnati Reds. Okay, I may be reaching again here, but hear me out. Aside from the stupid Wishbone C logo they both have, these are franchises who are very storied franchises. They are the pioneers of their respective sports, and for the better part of the last 40 years, they've been largely terrible. For the Reds, they are the oldest franchise in the MLB, having been founded in 1869. For reference, that was just 4 years after the Civil War ended. The Bears were founded in 1920 and are the second oldest franchise in the NFL, only behind the Arizona Cardinals. For reference, that was 2 years after World War I ended. So yeah, there's that. Major wars in the country ended very recently when these two were founded. Since their inception, the Reds have fielded very good teams, as the Bears have, and people forget that these two have long histories of winning. The only difference is the Bears have more championships than the Reds. Then you got how everyone loved the Big Red Machine of the 70s that many say were a dynasty, but I say they were a borderline one, like how everyone loved the 85 Bears, but those teams in the 80s should have been a dynasty easily. You got one of the most beloved ball players of all time in Pete Rose for the Reds, and one of the most beloved football players of all time in Walter Payton, but despite that, they were both incredibly controversial off the field. Reds fans despise the St. Louis Cardinals like how Bears fans despise the Green Bay Packers. Both fan bases are long-suffering and hated their owners, and both franchises currently have title droughts that have exceeded 35 years. Everyone is on the Caleb Williams train like how everyone loves watching L.A. De La Cruz, Miami Marlins, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Not only two Floridian franchises, not only are they two of the losingest franchises in their respective leagues, but they somehow won 2 championships each and have never lost a championship too. The Bucs were founded in 1976 and started off 0-26 as a franchise. Their franchise history is littered with awful teams, but then 2002 came when they put together one of the most dominant defenses in NFL history, and they kicked the shit out of the Raiders in Super Bowl 37. They followed that up with a few decent teams after that, but then went back to being irrelevant for an extended period of time. After drafting Mike Evans and building a good offense around him, Tom Brady joined the franchise in 2020. The defense was stout, and the Bucs won another Super Bowl by crushing the Chiefs in Super Bowl 55. Now, to their credit, Tampa has been a consistent playoff team since the 2020s, winning the NFC South every year since 2021, but it was mainly because the division has sucked, so I'm not going to ball wash them for essentially winning the most beautiful ugly person award. Despite recent success, the Bucs have the worst all-time winning percentage in NFL history, and it still blows my mind that they won 2 Super Bowls, both happening since the turn of the millennium too. Heading down to South Beach for the Marlins, who have been around since 1993 as part of an expansion era for the MLB, the Marlins got off to a rocky start. Then 1997 came around and the Marlins shocked the world by winning an exciting World Series over the Indians. They immediately capitalized off that success by blowing everything up the next season and losing 108 games. Florida struggled into the new millennium before pulling another World Series out of their ass in 2003. Oh, and by the way, 1997 and 2003 were the only 2 times they made the playoffs until 2020. Since then, the Marlins are seemingly in a never-ending rebuild with terrible ownership and a front office that constantly sets the franchise back with awful trades. It's so weird because 2020 was the first time the Marlins ever lost a playoff series, but many people hardly count 2020, so it took the Marlins 30 years to lose their first ever playoff series. Over the last 20 years, the Marlins have lost 100 or more games in 3 seasons, have finished in last place in the NL East 7 times, just 6 winning seasons. In 2/3 of those winning seasons, they've made the playoffs almost by complete default, and went from 2010 to 2022 without having a winning season in a full 162-game season. But my goodness, they somehow won 2 World Series. How? You see the comparison here? They are historically awful franchises that have very little success, but they strangely won multiple championships with the little success they had despite being awful for prolonged periods of time. New Orleans Saints and the Washington Capitals. Again, this one might need some explaining. The Capitals aren't as historically bad as the Saints, and the Caps certainly are not bad right now like the Saints are, but the thing is, over the last 20 years, 2 players revolve around these two, Alex Ovechkin and Drew Brees. Before Ovi was taken in 2004, the Capitals were consistent playoff droppers, but then went through some hard years to start the 2000s, and even at the start of Ovi's career. Washington broke out in 2008, making the playoffs, and even further in 2009 when they won the President's Trophy and lost to the Penguins in the second round of the playoffs. This kick-started Washington dominating the regular season but failing in the playoffs and struggling to make it past the second round, with Ovi establishing himself as an all-time great. Going into 2018, the Capitals still had never won a Stanley Cup, hadn't made it to the Cup since 1998 when they got swept by the Detroit Red Wings, and hadn't even made it to the conference finals since that season. At times, they even struggled to make it past the first round. All this included them winning the President's Trophy 3 times, and people began wondering if Sidney Crosby was better than Ovi due to playoff performances. The Capitals broke through in 2018 by conquering the Pens in the second round, took down the Lightning in the conference finals, and won the long-awaited Cup for Ovi in 5 games. But since then, the Capitals have not won a playoff series, which may be a moot point by the time this video goes out, since they have a very good team right now and are back in the playoffs. But with having the all-time goal scorer now, you'd think Washington would have won more than they should have. The Saints, on the other hand, were an awful franchise before getting Drew Brees in the offseason of 2006. when they were coming off of a 3-13 year and the city was still recovering from the effects of Hurricane Katrina. They stunned the league, winning the NFC South and making it to their first ever NFC Championship. 3 years later, the Saints were back in the playoffs. Brees turned in a fantastic season that, in my opinion, should have won him regular season MVP, but he got one better by winning Super Bowl MVP in their win over the Colts in Super Bowl 44. The Saints have been relatively consistent with making the playoffs throughout Brees' tenure with the Saints, as he turned in 4,000 passing yards with ease, kind of like how Ovi scored 50 goals this season like it was nothing at all. The Saints, though, had very little playoff success after winning the Super Bowl. They choked badly in 2017 and were robbed in the 2018 NFC Championship and then went one and done the next 2 seasons. So, like the Capitals, the Saints had what most franchises would kill to have. A franchise QB putting up all-time great stats consistently, always being in the playoff race, and even have said QB win them a Super Bowl. The problem? The Saints didn't win in the playoffs as much as they should have, like the Capitals have. It's too late for the Saints now because Brees is long retired, but will absolutely be a first-ballot Hall of Famer. But the time for the Capitals to win another cup for Ovi is now, which again is plausible, but Ovi isn't getting any younger at 40 years old. You'd have just liked to seen both these franchises do more with all-time greats and generational stars, but as a Pens fan, I'm not complaining about the Capitals' lack of playoff success with Ovechkin. Arizona Cardinals and the Sacramento Kings. Now we get into some long-time losers that have been around forever. The Kings are the oldest NBA franchise and have won a whopping single NBA title in 80 years as a franchise. It came in 1951 when they were the Rochester Royals, and they haven't made it back since then. As a matter of fact, they've been the worst franchise in the NBA with numerous relocations, can't sustain a front office, and have very little playoff success. As for the Cardinals, they are the oldest NFL franchise, being founded in 1919, and in 106 years as a franchise, just 17 playoff appearances, no Lombardis in 1 appearance, 2 championships that were both won before the NFL's color barrier broke. They have the longest active title drought in the United States, with their last one coming in 1947. Awful ownership and front offices, numerous relocations, and get ready for this. From 1947 to 1997, the Cardinals failed to win a single playoff game. I don't think I need to go any further than that. From Rochester, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Chicago, St. Louis, Sacramento, and Glendale, these two can't stay in one place and haven't won a championship in 75 plus years. Detroit Pistons and the Detroit Tigers. I really hate having to compare teams that play in the same city as each other, as you could tell with some of the similar entries on here, but I really have no choice sometimes. However, the Tigers and Pistons do have similarities. The Pistons were a powerhouse in the Eastern Conference in the 80s and early 90s, having made the playoffs every year from 1984 to 92. In fact, from 1988 to 90, the Pistons made the NBA Finals every year and won it back-to-back in 89 and 90. Then they went through a short rebuild and went back to being a perennial playoff team again from the mid-90s to late 2000s. The Pistons won the finals in 2004, and they made the conference finals from 2003 to 08. But from 2010 to 2024, the Pistons only made the playoffs just twice and failed to win a single playoff game. During that time, the Pistons finished last in the East 3 times. Now the Pistons had a remarkable turnaround season, making the playoffs and even winning a playoff game from a season they went 14-68 the year before. So there's some newfound hope with the Pistons today. The Tigers are similar, as they were a doormat for a solid decade from the mid-90s to mid-2000s, and before that, the Tigers were a historically proud franchise that won 4 World Series, and they were plagued by bad front offices and ownership. More notably, 2003, when they went 43-119. But in 2006, their rebuild came together and the Tigers made the World Series, where they lost to an 83-win team. The Tigers were a strong team before really becoming a powerhouse in the 2010s. They won the AL Central every year from 2011 to 14, made the World Series again in 2012, and made it to the ALCS in 12 and 13. They got swept in the World Series, but then after 2014, the Tigers took a turn for the worst. It all culminated when owner Mike Ilitch passed away in early 2017, and the Tigers were one of the worst teams in baseball for 6 years. They even had a season going 47 and 115 not too long ago, nearly breaking their own record. The Tigers had a fantastic run to close out 2024 to make the playoffs and stun the Astros in the ALDS. Now, the Tigers look like they're building off that run and have a young and exciting team nowadays. So both these Detroit teams had some incredible riches throughout their histories and then went through some awful and even historically awful times. Now the fans in Motown are being rewarded with good teams that have made the playoffs in the last 2 years. New York Jets and the Washington Wizards. Does anyone acknowledge the Jets had Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers? No. No more than anyone doesn't acknowledge the Wizards having Michael Jordan. Hey, anyone realize the Jets won a Super Bowl? If you say no, I don't blame you, seeing that their only one came 57 years ago and haven't made it back to one since. Do you know the Wizards won an NBA title? Again, how can I fault you for saying no when they won it when they were known as the Bullets and won it 47 years ago? At least the Wizards franchise had glory days in the 70s and made it to 3 other finals in the decade, but they have just been more and more irrelevant as time went on. The Jets have always been irrelevant and unimportant in the NFL outside of 1968 and maybe the late 2000s when they made back-to-back AFC championships. But here's the facts. Both franchises have gone over 45 years without winning a championship, are consistently bad, haven't had much playoff success either, and no one really gives them any peace of mind. The fan bases live solely just to be told that they suck, and even that might be putting it mildly. Miami Heat and the Tampa Bay Lightning. Unlike the Bucs and Marlins, the Lightning and Heat are a good Tampa-Miami comparison. See, the Lightning were founded in 1992 and have been widely successful as an expansion franchise. They've won 3 Stanley Cups since 2004, including back-to-back titles in 2020 and 21. In fact, since the late 2010s, the Lightning have been the best team in the Eastern Conference and have led the league in wins since 2018. This included a 62-win season in 2019 that resulted in 0 playoff wins, but you get the point. The Heat have been around as a franchise since 1988, and they have largely been successful in a rather short period of time, as that they have been in the NBA as well. They have won 3 NBA Finals since 2006, including back-to-back titles in 2012 and 13, and that was part of 4 straight NBA Finals appearances from 2011 to 14 with the super team that they formed. And you guessed it, they led the league in wins during that time as well. Miami has made it to the finals in 2020 and 23, losing both times, but it just shows you that the Heat have been consistently good. Both franchises are considered successful expansion franchises that had a period of making it to the championship round of their sports for at least 3 years in a row, and have led the league in wins for a period of time. They did have a few bad years like the Heat did before Eric Spoelstra was hired, and for a part of the early 90s when Tampa first started out in the NHL, but they have made some remarkable turnarounds to garner this respect that they've earned. And finally, the San Antonio Spurs and the St. Louis Cardinals. I hate admitting this because I was a big fan of the Spurs' Big Three back in the day, but the similarities are uncanny. As I just mentioned, the Spurs had the Big Three of Duncan, Ginobili, and Parker throughout the 2000s, and from 1998 to 2019, the Spurs made the playoffs every year. They won 5 NBA Finals along the way. It could have been 6 if Ray Allen didn't hit that clutch 3 in 2013. And they even went from 2000 to 2017, winning 50 or more games every year. San Antonio was top 2 in the West 13 times during that time span, and made the conference finals 10 times as well. Even in the shortened 2011-12 season, the Spurs managed to get 50 wins there too. They were a model of consistency and dominance with a legendary head coach in Greg Popovich, all while playing in a small market in San Antonio. Nowadays, the Spurs are at the bottom of the barrel in the Western Conference trying to find their rise to glory again, but it's been understandably hard. The Cardinals have been in the National League since 1892, and much to my dismay of admitting this, they have been widely successful. They've won 11 World Series titles, which isn't enough according to Cardinals fans, have had arguably the best scouting and drafting and player development for much of their existence. They have produced numerous Hall of Famers, and around the same time the Spurs were dominating the NBA, the Cardinals were a model of consistency and success in the MLB. From 2000 to 2022, St. Louis won the NL Central 12 times, made the playoffs 16 times, had 3 winning seasons of 100 or more games, one of which they made the World Series and failed to win a single game, made the NLCS 10 times, won 2 World Series in 4 appearances, and only had 2 losing seasons during that time, and yet the fan base acts like that's worse than the Pirates for some reason. All this while playing in a small market in St. Louis. Like how the Spurs had their big 3, the Cardinals had Edmonds, Wainwright, and Pujols throughout the 2000s, so they had their own big 3 too. It goes even deeper. You could throw in Kawhi Leonard and the Admiral David Robinson for the Spurs to make it a top 5, and Yadier Molina and Paul Goldschmidt for the Cardinals to make it a top 5 for them. St. Louis appears to be heading for a downward spiral today like how the Spurs are, but unlike the Spurs where I actually like them and still do, I enjoy watching Cardinals fans squirm. Maybe the Spurs can do something with Victor Wembanyama in the same way the Cardinals can do something with Nolan Arenado, but I have my doubts for both. In short, these 2 small market franchises have had a ton of success in the 21st century with a multitude of Hall of Famers and championships. The only people who hate these 2 franchises are rival fan bases, but outside of them, they are highly respected because of their success. The biggest difference, though, the Spurs didn't cheat like the Cardinals did. Well, there you go. That was part 2 of my 2-parter for this video. I did not anticipate this to be this long, but just wanted to chop it up into 2 separate videos. May not have said that in my first video, but yeah, there you go. If you have any other comparisons, let me know down in the comments below.